Hello, welcome to the Lisa Saunders Show. I'm going to be interviewing my very first friend in Mystic, Connecticut when I moved here about 6 years ago, Bambi Poppick. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. It's nice to see you.
So I guess it's okay if everyone knows we're friends, right? Even though this is an interview. Okay. Now, Bambi, you're here as the director of a very long name organization, but it's a really interesting organization, the Eastern Connecticut Community Gardens Association, Inc. So can you tell me what is that and what do you do?
We establish community gardens throughout southeastern Connecticut, and our goal is to improve food security and help people grow plants with high nutrition.
Now, what does that mean? You have community gardens. Are you doing all the work, or do you have volunteers, or people in their own community are doing their own gardens?
We set them up for people in different locations to run their own gardens. We come in and put in the raised bed gardens.
Now, what's a raised bed? We actually have some pictures.
We have a photo of a raised bed garden.
Let's see the first picture of a raised bed, because I didn't know what that was when you were first telling me.
Well, it's 8.5. Yeah, it's 8 foot by 4 foot.
This picture of that, is that
Yes.
8.5 by 4?
It's 8 by 4. Those are 3 in a row, standard raised bed gardens with just the compost and mulch, and we use seaweed as a topping on it without any plants in there. And the second photo we have is which we'll have in a minute, is a fully grown raised bed garden. As you can see, that it's really full of plants. That one's mostly tomatoes. The one off to the side has some squash in it. We establish these community gardens where atypical situations. Our goal is to plant a lot of community gardens in urban areas like New London and Norwich and most of southeastern Connecticut. But when they first started growing them, they were doing a lot of soil testing. And almost all the soil tests showed heavy metals like lead and some other heavy metals when they planted plants straight into the ground. So to overcome that, if you plant in a raised bed gardens, the roots of the plants don't touch the contaminated soil, and so they don't uptake those heavy metals. So in any setting where there's a space, you can actually grow a garden, and the production of vegetables, and that's usually done by weight, would be surprising to you. So we're trying to teach people gardening habits, how to set it up. We set them up at a number of nonprofit places, and some low income. In New London, we went to the New London Housing Authority and established the raised bed gardens there.
So what, you just went to the office and say, do you want us to bring a garden?
We did.
Okay, now who plants? Do you have a staff that plants them, or do you have volunteers, or do you say, if you have anybody in your community that'll volunteer to do it, I'll teach them how? How does that work?
Well, we approach them. We have grant funding for the materials themselves and a couple part-time volunteers, employees, but they have to have an engaged group of people, because we can't just put the garden in and they just leave it. And usually we're establishing there where people are excited about the gardening. At the New London Housing Authority, there's people who are living in settings but used to farm or garden and have those skills, and they're very excited to have the raised bed gardens there. So we found that when we go put them in, there's usually an engaged group that come in, and they do the planting, they do the weeding, they do the harvesting, and we also deliver just plants, and they come and put them on their stoop or on their little patio.
And that's what you have the money for, is you have funding for that through a grant. Now, do you take donations?
We do. We're mostly grant funded. We have several small grants making this possible. We also have, in our third picture I'll show you, we have some larger community gardens. Our largest project this year was the Giving Garden at Coogan Farm.
Okay, there's a picture of it.
And that's 1 day's harvest with 2 of our volunteers, and all the fruits and vegetables that are harvested go to the United Way, who brings them to the Gemma Moran, and they distribute them to the food banks, which is pretty special, because before they have access to the fresh fruit, it's usually canned goods. You go and all the fundraisers bring non-perishables, so their access to the fresh vegetables, and they're put out there several hours after they're harvested. The volunteers wash them and prepare them and put them in the totes. A truck comes and picks them up and does the distribution, which is awesome. So that's our biggest project.
Wow. Wow, and it's pretty too.
Yeah, it is very pretty. It's very colorful. We established gardens at all the Reliance House locations except for the offices downtown. And we planted fruit trees farther north in Scotland. We had gotten some grant funding for fruit trees to be planted for veterans to harvest and grow. We actually have, it's like an office building, apartment building complex that just had a parking lot and no green space. And that was it's a center for veterans run by Reliance House. But they had some avid gardeners in there, and they really wanted us to come and try to figure out some raised bed.
Now, can you do a raised bed on a parking lot?
We were going to there, and we could. We did not in that location. That was our plan, just because the building management did not want us to, and we found some other space behind the building that had enough light and access to water. And sometimes we have to do something creative. That was a very atypical location, and there was no outside water, so the manager decided they were going to run a hose from a kitchen sink downstairs and water it so the men could grow the vegetables, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, so you can put them right down on the pavement. It's not the typical place, but if it's the only place that you can do it. We also established some at some of the safe homes for the women's shelter. I actually personally went and did most of the physical work with one volunteer because of the security that you have to go through in order to go to the safe homes. I actually even had to turn the GPS off at my phone, and we went in there and put in some gardens because there's families living there. There's moms and children.
Might be in hiding.
Yes, and they are. And so just having people be able to feel like they're at home, and the kids to get their hands in the dirt, and we teach people what they're doing if they have no idea. And we come and we talk about why we're using the particular materials that we use and how it's going to grow. Some of the wood we get for the 8x4 is called dunnage. It's lumber that is left over from other projects. Builder Supply often gives us a good deal on that if we do it by the truckload. And then we have access to, most of the landfills have mulch for free if you pick it up and bring it with a truck. So we go and physically go and get the mulch.
Can you get mulch free at the Groton? I forget what it's called. Transfer station? Is that what
yeah,
it's
you
called?
can get it at the Groton Transfer Station. You can get it in Waterford. You can get it in Stonington. Those are the only ones I'm familiar with. But if you are a resident, you can just go and fill your truck or the trunk of your car or a garbage pail.
Now, do funds pay for a truck? I mean, how?
Some of our we have kind of an old pickup truck, but the funding pays for the gas that we use because we do drive around. We also have access to seaweed, and people are unfamiliar.
I thought that was kind of interesting. I was going to ask you about that. You said this raised bed had seaweed, and I thought, where else do you put seaweed? Inland, right? You don't need seaweed.
Well,
right?
Actually, a lot of people who are inland would love to have seaweed, but it's very expensive if you don't live somewhere near the.
So we're lucky enough.
Yeah, we are. There's a home in Lord's Point. There's a woman, for some reason, the way her house is positioned, as when the waves come in, her beach just fills up with seaweed, and she wants to get rid of it. And there's another location at the end of Stonington Borough near the beach where they shovel that, they rake it up every day. So we have volunteers go and they pitch it up on the wall and we fill the trucks. Seaweed is actually a wonderful topping. Plants like the salinity, even people don't think salt would be good for it, but and the nutrients from the seaweed as they compost, it's really a desirable topping, and it keeps the weeds down. So instead of putting something else to keep the weeds down, and I actually put it in my personal garden this year. I decided, so it's kind of cool. But I went to a conference up in Amherst, Mass for NOFA, which is, and I don't even remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a National Organic Farming Association, I think is what it is. And we were talking about seaweed. They were also jealous. They wanted to send down an 18-wheeler and fill it up and get the seaweed because it's so expensive. When you buy bagged stuff to put in your garden, if you actually went to buy a bale of seaweed, it would be impossibly expensive, but we're very lucky here. And a lot of people are very surprised when we come in and we put the mulch down and then the compost and then the seaweed. We donate plants and we donate seeds. Sometimes we give them fairly good-sized plants. Bonnie plants, which is the major distributor to the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and the True Values and that kind of thing, get their plants from there. But when they end their selling season and people aren't ordering them anymore, they just stop. They don't water them, they don't do anything, they don't spend any manpower. So a few years ago, people who were in my group before I came there went and rescued them by the truckload. So we do
rescue.
So we do that every year, and they have certain locations where they come and they just put them so we can use that space to distribute. One was the child care center right on Thames Street in Groton, but if there's we distributed thousands and thousands of plants, tomatoes, okra, squash, cucumbers that were already fairly established. So we drove around and we brought those to the raised beds that we had already put in, and people planted them. In New London and in Norwich, there was several locations where we just dropped off the plants. And people came in, quote unquote, and they adopted them. And tomatoes especially, because you can grow those in a pot on your patio or on your ledge or your balcony or wherever you have it.
This whole plant rescue. Because I picture commercials, a little plant in a cage, donate so this plant gets rescued.
Yeah, it was actually pretty awesome. I felt like Santa Claus when we were doing that. We went to the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. We brought hundreds of plants there. And we'd go the next day and every single plant would be gone, it was just really awesome. So with that part, we don't have the opportunity to do the education, but it was interesting because for some reason we had an abundance of okra donated this year. And I personally don't know what you do with okra. I know that you put it in gumbo, but and that was a surprising hit. They grew it both at the Coogan Farm, and when it went out, and we got all this great feedback about how wonderful the okra was. So now that's something we might put on the list.
Now, okay, well, how does somebody volunteer with your organization? What could a volunteer expect to do with you?
Well, at the particular locations that are like low-income housing or the Reliance House, that probably wouldn't be appropriate because we're depending on the residents of those places to do that. However, we have certain jobs that are kind of seasonal as we go. The seaweed pitching on the wall, if they really wanted to do it.
Somebody could be a seaweed pitcher.
And they come and what I mean is, you take the seaweed, you throw it up on the wall, it dries, and we put it in the truck. But the Giving Garden at Coogan Farm and Pawcatuck Nature Center always need, Peacoat Seapost Nature Center always need volunteers. Once it gets busier here, the garden will be open every day. Many of the volunteers that work there just dropped by and talked to Craig Floyd, who is the farm manager there.
Where?
I'm at it's the Giving Garden at Coogan Farm, which is off
Greenmanville Avenue.
Yeah, right off. It's sort of behind the what is the name of the daycare center there? It's like Great Beginnings or something. They're working on. Peacoat Seapost is working on restoring the original farmhouse there, and it's right on the road, and the driveway's right in there. You can spot our greenhouse now. We have a greenhouse we've established to lengthen the season, so they're going to actually start plants extremely soon.
Now this all started because didn't somebody do a study and found out if there was ever a disaster in this area, we'd all starve to death? We'd all have about 5 days of food.
And I don't know how long ago but that is true. And we also looked into it. In southeastern Connecticut, there are 20,000 food insecure people, 1 in 5 children. And what that means is, by definition, is they don't really know where their next meal is going to come from. Then those are pretty scary statistics. We do have some really strong food banks and food kitchens here, but we are fulfilling a need. The harvest from just the one farm, Coogan Farm, we had over 3,000 pounds of produce this year. And for a garden that size, that's actually, believe it or not, really impressive. But the Coogan Farm garden was established at the farm, but it had never been farmland for plants. It had been farmland for animals. So it being Stonington, the preparation for the site was much more difficult than they thought. There's huge boulders and rocks and stuff, so they had to get an excavator and clear that all out and make a
So there's a reason Stonington's called Stonington?
Yeah, we grow stones. If you dig into your yard, you will find them. But it was way stonier and rockier than they anticipated. So just the preparation for the first year was hard, and they didn't get quite the harvest they wanted to. But also the soil needed nutrients. It needed what they call amendments. Was all new language for me, but the amendments are, if you're doing it organically, which every garden we work on is organic.
What makes it organic?
So everything's a natural product with no pesticides, no nothing chemical on there.
How do you keep pests off them then?
Well, if you grow really healthy plants with really good amendments, natural amendments, which are minerals and that kind of thing, they are less susceptible to pests. We also have these little hoops you can put on the garden. It's either PVC piping that you can bend and put in a row and make like a little tunnel. And they have a special kind of netting you can lay over it while it's growing. The pests tend to attack the plants at either different times of day or different seasons. So if you're aware of what you're growing, you can cover it up and just be aware of the pests. We did lose plants at Coogan Farm.
What does a pest mean necessarily? Could it be a deer? Could it mean a bug?
It could be a deer, a bug, a woodchuck. The deer stayed out of the garden this year because of that particular garden, because they put electric fence around it. We had 3 or 4 really healthy gardens at one of the Reliance House gardens, which is up off of where the state offices are. I'm trying to think, it's like Thames Street. Anyway, they have this beautiful expanse of grass, but they have a lot of visitors. So they had bunnies, they had deers, they had woodchucks. So we went back and put up a simple fence around their gardens to protect it. Insects are a little different. Coogan Farm had one resident woodchuck, but he wasn't doing that much damage, so I think they set a heart trap and kept catching him and putting him somewhere else. So yeah, it can be all that, and you have to kind of just be aware of it. I was told with one of the tomato blight that the way to overcome it was just grow a lot of tomato plants, because some of them have, a fungus or whatever, and you just kind of be aware. There are things you can spray on your plants that are organic. I don't have that personal knowledge. People in my organization do, and we do spray some of those things, not using any chemicals, but to keep the pests off.
So this is really healthy food. Not only are people learning how to garden, but it's really healthy food.
Really healthy food. I actually went to a seminar on soil nutrition. That was an all-day seminar. There was actually supposed to be a second one. It was the one day it snowed here. It was so interesting on how to really make your soil really healthy. You do have to do soil testing, kind of see what it's missing as far as the nutrients, potassium. I'm not going to say all the right ones, but all the things that they need. And you put them in the soil. There's also a new way of gardening where you don't till up everything. Disturbing the soil in a huge way is not good for the soil. It's not good for the environment. So they do, some people do no-till gardening. We try to do less till gardening, using certain plants to soften the soil. I've learned a lot just working for this, just for my own garden at home that I can transfer. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to ever leave the dirt bare when you weren't gardening, like the off season. So you've done your harvest. I just left it out there, but you really should be planting what they call cover crops to cover it up, which are hardy and then die in the winter and they compost, or at least covering them up with seaweed or a topping. And letting something, or leaves. I used leaves from my yard to do that, and they decompose during the winter and the early spring, and that adds to the nutrients of the soil you're planting, which is just cool.
When I lived in Maryland, that was the only time I tried to have a garden, because I used to fantasize about living off the land, but then I found out it's a lot of work to do that. And so I planted these things, and something finally grew, but then somebody in my neighbor had a gun. And so the SWAT team came and they trampled all over my garden, and I gave up. So that was years ago, because they killed all my little pumpkins that grew. So I assume, as long as your ground isn't covered by the SWAT team or people in boots, that this will grow.
And I'm bringing up the Coogan Farm Garden just because it is the largest one we're working on, and actually we have a proposed one at the prison, which I'll talk about in a minute. But they have groups of volunteers that come that are wonderful. From Pfizer sends people over, the Mormons send people over, but sometimes they have to be very careful in instructing them where they can walk. Volunteers stepped on the markers, and then we didn't know it was growing in a row. So the regular volunteers know what everything is, but if you have volunteers coming in to weed, they really have to know what the plant looks like and what the weed looks like. So, but it's a way to learn things, and you go in, people just love to get their hands in the dirt. It's really healthy to do that. It's a great connection to the earth.
Now you should always wash your hands, right, after you garden.
Yes, but actually touching the soil is not unhealthy.
Well, I'm saying if cat feces, you know what I mean?
Oh, well, at the farm there's no kitty cats, right? But touching them, getting your hands in there is actually very healthy. All the organisms that are in there, there's fungus, there's bacteria, healthy bacteria, just like there are in your intestinal tracts. That's all very good. Yeah, if you have cats in your yard, you probably should do that. I have 3 dogs, and my cats don't go outside, so I don't worry about that.
Now, you have little gardening tools you brought.
Oh, yeah, I did, because I just want people to know when we start a raised bed garden, it's really, really low maintenance. The first year you tend to not even have any weeds. It takes like a year to establish even having any weeds. But people are envisioning, a big, spade kind of shovel. So really all you need, and I bought this cute little bag. You can get these anywhere at any, any one of the big box stores or one of the hardware stores or whatever. But you can buy just these little, this size shovel, and mine, sorry, they're used. I got them from home, but you don't need anything more than these to take care of what you're doing, because you're using fresh mulch, fresh compost. We actually got some of our compost from a piggery, which sounds like it would be dirty, that they leave composting, and it was like this dark, black, rich soil that just smelled wonderful. And they brought that over. It's full of what the plants need. But it's not packed down when you put it in there, so you can just put your plants in there, just put your seeds in there. It was fun because when I went to some of the Reliance House locations, I spoke to the cooks of the house. They have a cook that takes care of them. Some were very excited about using some of the herbs from the garden and the tomatoes and the peppers and adding that to the food that they eat on a regular basis.
And people feel proud.
They really do. They feel proud.
Grow something.
I mean, the one box we showed in that one photo, I mean, we went back, and that was just weeks later, and we were just so impressed. Somebody had been out there. They had been tending to it. They had really, they had a lot of success with their garden. They had, in particular, requested a lot of hot peppers. There was somebody in there that liked that kind of food, which is interesting in this area because it's multicultural here. People think of bilingual as being, Spanish and English, but if you go up towards the casinos, there's a huge Asian population, and they're eating kind of different foods. They're growing, bok choy and some of these things that I wouldn't know what to do with. But they're looking for those kinds of plants, and they're taking those kinds of plants from like the food banks. I spoke to the director at the St. Vincent de Paul food bank. They have a place where they serve meals, but they also distribute food, and they do tons and tons of it. But they said it was almost an education piece to get people to take the fresh fruits and vegetables. They would go right for the canned peas, and they're like, hey, this is much more, much more nutritious for you and your kids.
Well, do you have recipes or like simple recipes?
We haven't done that, but we were talking about that, especially when we found out like the okra was popular, and I said I don't even know what you would do with the okra, but the education piece is a big piece of it. It's a piece for the gardening part because people can take that and bring it home or to a different setting, but also for the preparation. And we found there's different target audiences.
Are you work with other organizations to help do that education, or is that your next goal?
That's our next goal. I know they do a little bit of it. St. Vincent de Paul, I know they do it at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. They're also a big food distributor. And I believe they do it at the Gemma Marana as well, which is the biggest one, with multiple sites, and they even have 2 mobile vans. They go around the community and distribute the vegetables, because some of the more nutritious vegetables are sort of different looking, and also when you grow things in your garden, they're not perfect like the grocery store. So part of the education piece is, we call them the ugly vegetables, but at St. Vincent de Paul, she was calling them the cosmetically challenged vegetables, which I thought was so politically correct and made me smile. But you teach people that, even if they don't look perfect, it's more genuine vegetables. Some of the genetically modified stuff, which I personally have problems with. That all looks picture perfect. It's made to ship well, but it's been raised with, you know, herbicides and pesticides, and they've modified it. Real, genuine fruits and vegetables don't look perfect. So that's an education piece too. We also would like to teach people how to do canning. Community gardens had done that a few years ago when they had an active volunteer that was really into that. So we've been looking for a location, but also dehydrating some of the fruits and vegetables, a way of putting them up and being able to use them later in the season. You know, and that's one of the reasons we put up the greenhouses. You know, we live in the Northeast. The growing season is certainly not as long as it is in the South, but if you can start certain plants in the greenhouse setting and have the baby plants ready to put in the ground right when they're ready, you can be growing things and growing hardier things in the fall. They actually take certain crops, when they are done, pull them up and put something else in that row that's going to grow. So the variety of foods, you know, the winter crops are more like turnips and potatoes and things that keep well, but they grow really long. I have kale in my garden that still survived despite our snowstorm. I mean, it's still there. So some of the plants are super hardy, some are not. So,
like, the only people I feel are really ready for an emergency when you're out of power and everything are the Amish. So, you know, because it doesn't matter if they can't get internet, they weren't on it anyway.
Right. I always feel like if we each grew something different and traded it, we could keep everybody going for a long time. We really could.
So you know my property. I hardly have sun in the front, but I don't really have much sun in the back. What should I grow?
You do have to have a sunny spot for some things. In fact, we had one unsuccessful garden that was sad at one of the Reliance House locations. It's in the city part, but they have this huge tree that is always shady, and so they were sad because we planted everything in. The plants grew, but nothing had any vegetables. So it is a challenge. I think on your property, you probably, I mean, the raised bed boxes are not ugly. You could put one that was more narrow, even in the front, on your lawn, and have it look like you could, you know, do plants that were pretty and just plant them there.
Well, Bambi, we only have 2 minutes left.
I'm sorry, I went on and on.
I'm glad you went on and on. Gee, I didn't have to go through my list of questions. You made it so easy for me. Thank you. But is there anything you wish we had said?
I just wanted to add, we do one other thing at the end of the season called gleaning. A couple years ago, I had surgery on my foot, and I couldn't finish harvesting my own garden. And this group came in, and they went in the garden and harvested everything that was left over, and brought that to the food bank. And they also did that this year at all the apple tree farms. It was a really abundant apple season.
Well, people need to go to your Facebook to
yes,
find
they do.
out events, because you have events, you know, that come up.
Educational, mostly educational events, but really fun, and usually short 1 hour seminars where you can go in and learn.
These classes tend to be free?
Yes.
So they should go to your website. Say your Facebook page again. What is it?
It's Eastern Connecticut Community Gardens Association.
On Facebook?
On Facebook.
Okay, and they can go and find out future events or how they could maybe volunteer if they wanted to.
We would love to have more volunteers. You can give 1 day a week, 1 day a month. You can come every day. We have some volunteers who are really into it, and because we're growing food for the food insecure, they're there every day.
Well, great. Thank you, Bambi,
so much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to take so much of your time.
No, I'm glad you took it. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Lisa Saunders Show, and I will see you next week.